to the cloud. It's now recording.
Okay.
Thanks again for everyone coming in here for week 5, module 6 on radio 511 on your radio dial on R511 Instructional Technology Foundations in IST. And we have a person who's very familiar with IST because at one point he was in the same boat as you, thinking about this kind of class. He might have actually taken this class as a student at IU with Dr. Mike Melinda, probably, or maybe somebody prior to Mike Melinda.
I'm not sure who it was, but yes, I took the class.
So Scott Grabinger's been at the University of Colorado, or was at the University of Colorado, Denver since '87 till about 2007 or so, 2008.
2008.
And was at University of Nebraska-Lincoln before that, and got one of his degrees at IU with a business focus, which the IST program used to have more focus on business. And right now, it doesn't have as many faculty that have an HPT, HRD, or business kind of focus as it once did.
We had, when I was there, we could declare a cognate area. And that's how I remember those words. I'm not sure, but and so I declared my cognate area in business, and essentially what it was a minor in business. So
did you take business courses too while you were here?
Yes.
Okay. So many people do still. It's hard. The Kelley School of Business is ranked very, very highly. So it's good to get on your resume if nothing else. Did you have a faculty member named Ivor Davies? Was he here at the time?
Yes, Ivor was there.
Okay.
Yes.
Lives not too, I can jog to his house when I go running. He's not too far from me. He's still around Bloomington. He's still consulting with England or something.
Wow. I thought he was old when I was there.
He was old when you were there. There's a lot of people. Did you get to know a guy named Tiagi?
Oh, yes.
Okay, he probably was old when you were there too,
and
he's still around.
He edited the Performance and Instruction Journal for a number of years.
I'm going to try and bring Tiagi to this class next semester. Tiagi comes up with one free new game a day or so, he tells me. But anyone, if you haven't heard of Tiagi, his name is Silver Salon Tijarajaran or something like that. Go to thiagi.com. Tiagi.com. He's a facilitator.
And you'll want to give him at least 2 hours of the class. He'll take it over.
He's an interesting person. I've presented with him a couple of times at some of the gaming and simulation conferences and at ISPI, and his son too with us. I know him well. I was at his 75th birthday, maybe 10 years ago, or not quite 10 years ago. So he's in his 80s and still working in the field. So you know a lot of the folks here. Did you have Mike Melinda as a professor or not?
Yes, I did have Mike Melinda, and then presented with him for a couple of times.
Jim Pershing, offhands?
No, he wasn't there when I was there.
Okay. So Melinda was one of the folks, and Ivor Davies, who overlapped times with me. Dr. Mike Melinda developed this course and had recorded videos after he retired to keep his video lectures going, but we stopped using them a couple of years ago. But I do bring him back to do a session every once in a while. So he's very, very active still. He wrote a new book. It came out this past year with one of his former students about instructional design methods.
What about Dennis Pett?
No, not as active or not around here as much. Yeah. So, but yeah, Ivor and Mike Melinda definitely. Have you been back to Bloomington in any recent times?
No, it's been a number of years since I've been back to Bloomington.
Since the new building was built in '92, that's when I arrived. And so now we're going through remodeling. And so today I was on a task force remodeling the library and other things. Howard Mellinger, I don't know if he was the dean when you were here, might have been the dean when you were here. He's still around and helping provide input on the remodeling. He got federal money to build the School of Ed to be a demonstration site for technology and education. So there was federal monies to have it be kind of a shining star on a hill. Now it needs to be revamped a bit, because 30 years is a long time to be.
30 years is a long time in technology today.
Yeah, definitely a long time in technology space. So, opening question: why did you pick this field to enter into? I think you're at the Loyola Chicago maybe at the time when you decided to enter this field. Were there influential factors, or were you interested in something particular?
Geez, I'll try not to make it too long. I left Loyola as a social studies teacher. And so my first year outside of Loyola, I actually was in a ungraded school where every topic, every subject at every level met at the same time. So as a teacher, that meant you taught every subject throughout the day. And that was elementary and middle school.
Wow.
Yeah. No, this was in Missouri.
Okay.
And I left that after 1 year because a position opened up in Peoria, Illinois, which is where my parents were living at that time, where I could be just a social studies teacher. And I don't know about any of your students tried to be a social studies teacher, but if you weren't a coach, you couldn't, it was pretty difficult to find a job, because that's what they shoved off onto the coaches. I was one day while I was looking around in a library in St. Louis, I found a book on an educational media by Harvey Fry. I was always interested in photography and graphics and art, but I always considered myself as an art person with no talent. And this looked like a perfect thing for an art person with no talent, because it had all kinds of templates and things that you could use and recipes for turning out things for education or for school, which is what I wanted to do. And so I found a program near Peoria, Illinois at Illinois State University, got my master's there, and wound up a librarian for 5 years. Library media specialist.
Oh, that's how you got connected.
So, but yeah, it was my interest in photography and graphics, I think, that grabbed me at the beginning. And so when I came back to IU, we were still doing things with pen, ink, Kohinoor, different kinds of lettering, many different ways of producing transparencies for overhead projectors, as well as a lot of photography things, high contrast and so forth. And so, I mean, I love the production aspect of it, and that's what brought me to that. And of course, now everything that I learned at that point is obsolete, because we do everything on the computer now. So,
well, everything might be obsolete, but the mindset isn't. The notion of production, making, doing, designing is almost dominating within this field.
There is, yes, there's one thing missing though: the tactile function. What it felt like to actually create these things with chemicals and ink and pen and using different kinds of tools, as opposed to a mouse solely allow. So this tactile thing, I still think it's somewhat important, and also makes it a bit more fun. I know it took long enough to make an overhead projector or overhead projection sheet that now you turn out a PowerPoint in 2 minutes. It might take 2 days to turn out an overhead transparency sheet, and you made damn sure that it was a meaningful piece of work. You didn't waste it on words.
I asked Brent the last thing. I said, what's a good question that I should ask Scott when he comes here? And you know what he said? He said, ask him if he's an artist. And so you've answered the question already. Want to be an artist, but we'll come back to where you are now later on, because I think you really have become you've fulfilled that. It's been a perpetual journey into the art, field of art and design and photography, and you're not alone. Gary Morrison, Tom Duffy are now photographers, and other people who retired are telling they're professional photographers here in Bloomington. So it's something about this field that attracts people who are interested in visual design and art. And our former department chair, Elizabeth Bowling, comes from the field of fine arts and is an artist and is always drawing people's pictures at department meetings and whatnot, and doodling and doing all sorts of things there. So early on, 3 years after you arrived at University of Colorado, Denver, you got a book with Brent and with David Jonathan related to expert systems, if I'm reading the resumes correctly.
Yes.
What got you to, the three of you, to do a book on expert systems so early in that field? Because I was studying it at the time. I was interested in it. It's a field that was overpromised and underdelivered. It's not till today that we actually see some real inroads being made in AI.
Mhm.
What was,
Yeah.
was there anything groundbreaking about that book, or any reason, what was the rationale about that at the time?
How did we start that? Geez. I was Dave Jonathan. He was the chair of the department at that time. Was really interested in instructional design and the process of instructional design and instructional development, as we made, that those two terms had slightly different meanings back then. But and I was looking at something that I could do that wasn't what anybody else was doing. And we were talking about instructional design one day and say, wouldn't it be neat if you could get on the computer and write out your objectives for you, performance-based objectives. And so, yeah, it would be neat. And so we started looking at how to do that, and we started looking, with the typical, we started with algorithms and a simple flow chart, if, and, or, whatever, leading to different paths. And, but you wanted to have different values in there too, to be able to say, well, this is more important. X is more important than Y. And so in order to do that, I started looking at expert systems, and in fact, started to learn to program in one of the early languages. And we were able to paste this expert system on top of work we were doing with HyperCard.
I remember.
Do that, and began to, and as it broke out, as we said, well, what are the sections that are going to be involved in creating an expert system? And the initial is a problem definition. Well, that's one of the things that you start with. And so each one of those kind of turned into a chapter of a book, at first it was an article. At first I wrote a series of articles for Performance and Instruction Journal, and then we put them all together into the book at that time. So
David Johnson's one we'll read from in a couple of weeks. He's been very influential in the field, and we talked about him with Brent last hour. So I've prepped my students a little bit on that. As I said last hour, I wrote to David Johnson in my first semester as a grad student after leaving the field of accounting, a letter, a pen and paper, and he wrote me back. This is in the late 80s or mid 80s or whatever. It's a long time ago. But, I was privileged to get to know him after that. And, he really led the field. You were lucky to have someone like that as a department chair.
Yeah, he was department chair and mentor.
Wow.
So we created a good little department there for a while.
Really, really powerful department. He was a thought leader in the field. And unfortunate that he passed away. Now it's maybe 10, not quite 10 years ago, having lung cancer, and it spread throughout. Yeah. But it was. I got the chance to visit him at Missouri during the latter year, and I had a chance to write a letter for him to get the curator professorship. So I was fortunate enough to get to know him well enough. In his field, in his prime. So after that, doing that particular book, were you? We're reading the article on rich environments for active learning. Was this an area of immediate interest, or were there other things that attracted you before getting into the rich active learning environments and rich environments?
We were working also at that same time with hypertext and hypermedia.
Right.
And I think both those terms are passé now, but at that time, it tells you where we were at the beginning of things when we separated text from media, even though both are media. But so we worked on hypertext. We began making presentations at places and running workshops. We ran a workshop in Germany one year on hypertext with a number of participants for a week of time. And we put together a book based on that, on hypertext. And then based on one of the people that was at that conference, he and I joined with a colleague of mine, Joanna Dunlap, yep, and turned out another book on hypertext, hypermedia. So we worked in that field first, and the rest came a little bit later.
The hypertext field was influential on me, and it's really a precursor to the web. All that we're doing on the web, our understanding of people's pathways and how to signal text that's important, and pathways of learning, all that comes from the initial work in hypertext and hypermedia. And there were experimentations that turned books at the time into hypertext or using supercard or hypercard documents. The early e-books, if you will, were done that way.
Well, we were so excited with hypercard because we could produce something on our own. If you learned to program with it, and it wasn't hard to learn to program with it, but just to have the ability to create a button that went somewhere else,
right,
was amazing at that time.
Yeah, it really was. But and now here we are, just traversing every night, often different in La La Land and wherever you want to go.
Well, we don't talk about it anymore because that's the nature of the beast right now. Everything is hyper.
Right, the whole world's become hyper. In many ways. So does anyone want to jump in here and ask any questions before I go to a couple others that I have? Have you all heard of hypertext? And the hypertext, and before that was laser discs and multimedia was the buzzword. Sarah says she just Googled it now. She hadn't heard of it before. Okay. So, basically, I think of it as the early days of the pre-web. I guess it'd be the proto-web using hypertext. And so we've utilized principles and ideas that were developed during the hypertext heydays. So yeah.
Well, we really wanted to do during that period too is what advertisers are doing now. We wanted to be able to track people. We wanted to track, what buttons they used, what cards they visited on a program that we'd written or whatever. And those things were just either non-existent or very minimal at that time.
Well, tell us about the rich environments piece, because they're going to be reading that next week in here. Rich environments for active learning. You can give them the cliff notes and help them out. And I think I saw you present on this, and I don't know for sure at AECT or AERA or someplace. Do you remember presenting it at a conference somewhere?
Oh yeah, I use this as a basis for different presentations of over a period of years, because this article, Rich Environments for Active Learning, formed the basis, sort of my philosophical basis for working in education for the next number of years as I was working. It was a couple of us were interested in higher forms of learning and taking off from how everybody is always identified, defined, restate or something, those basic sorts of performance objectives. And we were more interested in creating and recognizing or consolidating information. And I got interested in the reals when a student approached me and said she wanted to work with me. And so we started working on some of these areas and difference here. And it began to develop into this big article, Rich Environments for Learning, that was done for a text that, again, Dave Jonathan was editing for, was it AERA? I'm not sure.
That could be, yeah, that's maybe where I ran into it. So one of these is a Macmillan textbook, or Simon and Schuster. But,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think your work ended up in a couple different places in the act, because I've seen it in various,
Mhm.
so.
For example, I moved on from there, into looking at different ways. Well, how can we teach to be consistent with this framework? And one of those methods was with problem-based learning. And so I got heavily involved with problem-based learning, and at the same time with Tom Duffy in conducting workshops and adding that, teaching our classes with that system.
So who is a former professor at IU, and I worked with as well many times. So yeah, I'm very familiar. Yeah, I think I remember the two of you working together on some things. Right. So did you kind of or reflect back on your career and say these were the pinnacle moments, or these were the key things, or do you ever reflect back and say this could have been an alternative path that I could have taken, and these are alternative things that I would be interested in now? Are there areas that have come to light now that you're reflecting on and say, oh, really interesting. I wish I would have looked at this, and maybe some of our people could, explore.
No, not really. I look, what I did, and it's done. One thing I do reflect back at and have a wish or regret is that the work I was doing with learning online for individuals with psychiatric disabilities, I wish that had been picked up by someone and continued on. But back then it was a little early on that. In fact, I had a grant. I wrote for a grant proposal, and the chair of the grant proposal vetoed it because they said they didn't believe that mental illness was a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, you encounter all kinds.
So now you're creating travel guides. Do you tap into your ID knowledge in creating those travel guides?
The writing is the same. It's you do your research, you organize, you start putting paragraphs together. Pretty soon you got a chapter. Put enough chapters together, you get a book.
Mm-hmm.
But it's essentially what we're doing is technical writing in the field, and that's what it is. So it was easy for me to move from writing about education matters into writing about visiting places in Italy.
The first time you did one, were you thinking, no one will publish this, I'll still do it anyways, or did you have a publisher before you even got going?
No, never did when I wrote my books or articles. I wanted to write what I wanted to write, and then take it from there, and hopefully find somebody who was also interested in what I was particularly doing.
So how many have you finished?
5 guidebooks, and 2 travelogues, or memoriams, of travel experiences.
And have you found publishers for each of those?
No, I published through Amazon.
I've tried it too. I've done one through, it was called Amazon Create Space. Now it's the Kindle, I guess.
I started with, it was called Create Space. Now they've got another name for it, but it does the same thing.
Yeah, Book Surge was maybe a name early on. Does that ring a bell?
No, that doesn't ring a bell to me.
Yeah, they had Book Surge, and it was Create Space, and now it's the Kindle. But you want to show us, you've queued up on the share, you want to show us some of the parts of, or you want to talk about what it is before you do show us what it is that you've been doing for the last dozen years.
Well, every fall I go to Italy for about 2 months, and I'll do research At first, it was research. The first 5 times were to get research for books. And then I realized, and I didn't know this at the beginning, I realized I had to keep them up to date. So then, of course, poor me, I had to go back again every year to start update things. And every book took a sequence or whatever. And so that's while I was doing that, I initially started using photography, going back to something I had been interested in, but mostly using it as a memory guide for when I was writing about different paintings, statues, churches, whatever. And then I started realizing I like to take nice pictures too. So I started turning into doing the learning more about digital photography and catching up to where the world was with that. So yeah, so poor me, I have to go back to Italy every 2 years. And of course, I haven't made it for 2 years now because of COVID. So
Oh. And apparently you know Italian.
I do speak some Italian. Yeah, I can get by with my relatives and friends, and not fluent though. Wouldn't mind being fluent, but I can get by.
Okay. You want to share what you've got? Can you find the share button still?
Yeah, share screen, huh? I guess you're seeing this.
Yep.
Because I don't have any indication of it, except the stop share, I guess. So I don't know. We've been to a lot of places, and sometimes my wife comes along, but usually I'm alone because she gets real irritated with me when I'm working. It's like, we're not doing anything. So you get the town of Vernazza and another town there of the Cinque Terre, along with a picture of from Venice. The arches that you see here in the large format is the bridge that's in the background of the Mona Lisa. And so I don't want to bore people to death here. So
oh, you're not.
let me know. Ask me what you'd like. So we continue on. There's aqueduct, not Roman, built in the 1500s. In a town that I go to. I go to a town. The name of it is Arezzo, and I have and the reason I do that is I found I had relatives there, and the first time we went to visit them in 1992, we had been traveling through Europe, and after we got there, they just took control of everything and took us from Florence, every church in between Florence and Rome, every church in Rome. One of my relatives was a priest. but we saw a lot, and we did a lot, and had an exciting experience. And the only person I could talk to is the priest, because he was an American, born in America. And that's when I started wanting to learn how to speak the language, and started doing all kinds of different ways to learn to speak. So this is one of the areas that you see frequently in coffee table books. Mm. The pictures that you often see in coffee table books are from an area called the Val d'Orcia. And that's where you see these roads lined with cypress trees, vineyards or fields of wheat, and olive orchards and thing. And it's in Tuscany. So all 5 of my books are done in different areas of Tuscany. And so it's my favorite area of all of this that I see. Here's our vineyards. I stay in a place, I don't know if you're aware of, they're called agriturismos. They are working farms, usually growing grapes and olives, that have changed, remodeled their old stables and old barns and old buildings into apartments. And so you can go and stay at one of these agritourismos for a week or more. And if you're lucky, you'll be at one that feeds you, make sure that you have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And this is a vineyard from one of the places that I stay, that I stay there for usually 4 or 5 weeks. And they give me a nice rate. And then I put them in the book. Yes, I'm for sale. Anything particular?
Your website with them, so that if people want to take a look at that, the stgbooks.com, right?
stgbooks.com, yes. That's for my pseudonym for writing, Scott Tiezzi Grabinger.
I see. Okay.
My Italian family is named Tiezzi. And so I still have cousins there. And it's really great to be able to stay with relatives because they give you a different perspective on things. They show you things that no one else sees. You learn stories of what, other people don't do. And so, that's really one of the differences in my writing from other guidebooks is being able to have that family help me out with that. And it's amazing how close, the Italian families are really strong. And I frequently run into problems with, you need to make sure that you give each family member the same amount of time when you're visiting, so that nobody feels taken advantage of, or nobody feels that you haven't paid enough attention to them. And so sometimes the Italian family deal can get a little bit much for me, but it's all in all, it's a real plus.
Mm.
This is a picture that many people have probably seen hundreds of times. And when I found the place, I had to take my own picture of it too, even if it wasn't any different.
And what is it?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I guess it's a chapel on a hill in the Val d'Orcia area that I had mentioned in Tuscany, all by itself. There are cypress trees on two sides of the building. The entry is actually I'm taking this from the back of the church, or the apse, and the entry to the church is around the front there, around the other corner. And it's just by itself. It's, the history of it is odd and unique. It was, built around the 1500s, and it makes for a beautiful scenery, beautiful setting for people who are visiting the area around a town called Pienza. Pantheon in Rome. That's the concrete dome that don't remember exactly the year that was built, but it still mystifies engineers at how this was accomplished in that particular time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't know, I guess I can go back to my library media or my instructional technology days and say, yeah, it's maybe if I hadn't done all that writing, which was one of my favorite parts of the job, if I hadn't done all that writing then, maybe I wouldn't have written, gone on to visit these places and done more writing there.
Well, I have a few questions for you then. First off, what skills and competencies or courses would you recommend to people that they take to equip them with these kinds of skills?
Well, I'd recommend a creative writing course. And that's to get out of the technical mindset. That's what I kind of struggled with at the beginning before I wrote both my travel logs, was getting away from being so technically minded in linking up sentence to sentence to paragraph and chapter to chapter, and putting things with bullets I looked through the guidebooks, everything has a bunch of bullets with it. And to be a little more creative, you got to get out of that mindset a little bit. And so I struggled with that somewhat, but began to have a lot of fun with the writing in terms of, oh, good, I can say things here that are off the wall and somebody will enjoy and do that, as opposed to have to make everything crystal clear and perfect, like following a recipe.
ST and Ed Tech is a discipline. I'm sorry, it can be very structured, right?
Yes. The travel books, the guides, they're very structured, and the travel logs aren't so structured. It's just each paragraph, each chapter is a different essay, a different experience, tells a different story.
So I teach a course on Saturdays, which covers critical and creative thinking. And those of you wanting to get into creative thinking, please take my Saturday class next time it's offered. Renee has a question for you. Renee's taken that class. Renee wanted to jump in. Go ahead, Renee.
I was gonna ask the question you asked about the if you have formally learned photography, or if you self-learn the skill.
Boy, I'm self-taught. I got interested in it as a kid when I was like 8 years old, and my parents bought me a camera. And I continued on through college or through high school, and then into college, I learned how to do black and white darkroom work, and was heavily into it for a number of years. In fact, it wasn't until I actually went back to IU that I kind of got out of photography a little bit, because I was using it technically so much for different times of assignments. And was that R510, the production class?
Production class might be in 541.
540.
Yeah, okay. And I kind of got away from it as I moved on with the kids, and I started a new job in Lincoln, Nebraska, and so forth. And then I became, again, further, it's all been self-taught. Even when I started into digital photography, I'd pick up a book, or I'd find something on the web that can help me. Or like, we're going up to Breckenridge in the mountains here tomorrow, and we're going to spend a week there. And I'm hoping to find a couple of waterfalls to take some pictures of. And so I've been looking on the web, studying on the web on how to make these waterfall pictures. And so when I'm ready to get up there, try it.
It's still technically summertime. Summertime in Breckenridge is so lovely. It's one of my favorite places in the world besides Rocky Mountain National Park.
Well, it's the aspen are changing now, and so that'll be the other focus of my photography is aspen leaves. It has they're bright gold, giving with that. So looking forward to that.
You've been kind of non-traditional, but in a way, like I said, other people like Duffy and so forth, they're doing photography now too, Gary Morrison and others. But reflecting back on your students that you had both in Lincoln and in Denver, what were some of the places, do you remember some of the jobs that they took on that were not in a traditional kind of setting? Do you have any former students who are working in different settings that we might not think about as being part of the field? Do you have any examples?
Let's see here. One of the most recent examples I saw is one of our best students in instructional technology at CU. She now helps people who are leaving homes and downsizing, and she's helping people do that. I'm sure that we can relate this back to instructional technology and its technical processes, and we're good at we get good in instructional technology in parsing things down to their simplest forms. So that, yeah.
You have a couple other job examples. Maybe it's of a more traditional nature.
Well, another, it's funny, it's the good students it's the really good students that stay in contact with you. I don't know if you've noticed that. I, wound up with a bank. And again, a fairly typical sort of HR job, but more into the psychology portion of what we deal with when we study education, educational psychology, and so forth. Let's see here. Where did John Higgs? They hired him for his training expertise, and he got a doctorate from our program in a nursery. And I mean plants. in plants, and helping identify plants and identify things that are wrong. So sometimes people have a background, that leads them to in a particular way, and then in another way, somebody will hire you as an instructional technologist, and you pick up something new, because even though when we study instructional technology, we're studying it kind of out of context, the methods, when it's actually practiced, are always in a context.
Right.
And so we've always got to be prepared for some kind of context to practice our skills. And for example, I thought that after I got my doctorate, I'd go to work for a business. And that didn't happen. I guess I got more interested in what it was to be like working for a university, and wound up at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And again, though, this business background, I was able to pull it in with consulting work while I was practicing as a professor.
So what kind of advice would you have for students here on how to network early on in one's career, how to network with others and get to know the discipline, get to know the conferences, get to know the people, get to know the journals, all, the ins and outs. What are some tips that maybe you utilized that were helpful?
I always went where I was interested with what I was interested in. I guess it's not very specific advice, but it is in terms of, boy, if you're going to dedicate your life to something, make sure you're interested in it, and know that you may wind up with a master's or a doctorate in IST, but you're going to wind up with another informal master's or a doctorate in something else as you're working in that field.
Well, that's the advice we have people for working on a dissertation. Make sure you're passionate about the topic, because if you're not, you're going to take a lot longer to get done, so it's really critical that, you think about what it is that you want to tackle, or what it is that you want to address.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I always told my dissertation students, your job isn't to fix anything, it's to get out of the program.
Yeah, there's two kinds of dissertations: get done dissertations and make an impact dissertations.
Yeah.
There aren't a large percentage of make an impact dissertations. They all make an impact, but I mean, they change the field. Not many go ahead and change the field,
Mm-hmm.
As high
Right.
hopes as what one might have, or prior track record in your previous,
Mm-hmm.
life, whatever it is you were doing. It's hard, just get, as Scott said, get done, just do it and get done.
Well,
and move
it's
on.
hard too if you have a family.
Yeah.
And again, you're looking at, your focus, because you can let things take you many different directions. But if you've got a family and you're going to school, there's always that notion in the back, hey, look, I can't spend 10 years doing this. I've got to get it done so that we can move on.
Yeah, the thing I didn't mention is that since you left, and even though the funding has gone down for going to conferences and things like that, so
Yeah.
you really have to be interested in the topic, because there's not going to be much funding to go unless you have external funding and so forth. And especially now with COVID, it's even tougher to travel anywhere. So not only you have a funding restrictions, you got travel restrictions, you got
Mhm.
psychological restrict. You don't want, a lot of people don't even want to travel or, even by car. So there's a lot of factors that come into play in terms of networking face to face. And a lot of people having to rely on online kinds of networking like LinkedIn, which you have a presence in, or Facebook or something like that as a way to network and get to know others. And AECT is lost its director, and so Ellen Wagner, I don't know if you know Ellen, she's
Yeah.
over, she's an old friend, and she's trying to add to the online networking space and so forth. We've got only a couple of minutes left. Does anyone want to jump in with a question that they might have that they didn't ask? I wanted, one thing I would like to ask you before we go is there anything that has come up during our conversation that we didn't have a chance to talk about? Something that you'd like to add in, some advice, some tips, some career-related suggestions?
Well, yeah, I have a career-related suggestion. Since you were just talking about it, was conferences, how important they are to maintaining your thinking at the highest levels on the newest topics. We had some rules here at CU, and one was never go to a conference unless you're presenting.
Mhm.
And then never go to a conference unless it was, this was an area that you were interested in. And I'd find, you go to conferences, and there were two things that had a significant effect on me. One was a really good presentation that seemed to fit within my mindset, to fit within my schema. That was always important because a good presentation makes your mind explode with ideas. The second one was a really bad presentation, because a really bad presentation makes your mind explode with ideas too, in a different direction. It's two different creative ways to get at a task. It's the bad the presentations that you can say are bad are those that are mediocre, that don't stimulate you one way or the other. But what you're looking for that. And like I said, I think it's just absolutely critical to maintaining your highest professional status as you can.
Renee's had another comment. These are beautiful pictures, and Sarah has a question for you. But before Sarah jumps in, I want to just comment on what you just said. If you go to a large conference, be strategic. You can get at AERA, you could get sucked into so many different directions. There's a SIG special interest group on everything. You want to go to a SIG on grief in the family context, you can find that. You want to go to, a SIG on gender issues and computer tool, you can just find anything. So at a big conference, I really recommend looking at the booklets ahead of time and mapping it out so that you've got written, so you can almost treat AERA as a graduate course that you never had. There are people are there, all the famous people are there that you're going to read about. Why don't you create your own class and attend the conference as a self-directed learning class and set up each time slot, 10 to 12, 12 to 2, whatever, as related to that topic or something similar, and have a backup plan. Sometimes, the presenter, it doesn't meet your needs, and you can often go to the backup room. But if you have plan A and plan B, maybe even plan C, and you have a topic in mind, you look for all the people under that topic. And let's say for me, 2 of my AERAs was spent thinking about my qualifying exams. I was able to go to AERA and really get equipped for the 2 topics I had in mind. One was on cooperative reading techniques. The other one was on collaborative learning stuff, collaborative writing, and technologies. And I was able to just find all sorts of things that came in totally handy for my qualifying exam. So if you go to a big one, you have to do that, or you get lost, or you have to be someone who's in the field for a long time and you can network with folks. But until you're in the field for a while, you don't want to spend your whole conference time networking. You want to go there to learn. But if you have a chance to go to a small conference In the old days, Scott might remember Macadamia. Macadamia was a real focus. Apple Computer had sponsored, but it was a fantastic conference. And there's some of these smaller ones, some of the user group conferences even can be very enlightening and interesting and interactive. So I'd recommend either the small one where you can have a chance to kind of shine a little bit. I've had some students who have flunked their qualifying exams. They've gone to one of the smaller conferences and have been a rock star at these things and come back. They revised their qualifying exams. They got new self-esteem. You can get some identity at the smaller ones and get some real important networking and feedback from the people who are in the field. But at the bigger ones, you want to try. This is my take, Scott. And you can comment on it. The bigger ones you want to treat as a graduate student, treat as a graduate class. Scott, you want to add to that?
Oh no, I totally agree with that. It's yeah, AERA has so much to it that you could get a master's degree going to AERA.
Yeah.
If you're focused and keep it, and keep to that focus.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's an alternative though. Let's see here. Who was it? I think it was Duffy who told me this. He said another strategy is you go to every presentation by the most famous person you can find.
Yeah.
And tag those famous people and follow them and maybe even get a chance to network with them or introduce yourself.
Another thing I've seen is where a professor takes a class like 511 here and has meetings with his students with the different people they're reading about that semester. So that makes it just like what we're doing virtually here. You're meeting Scott and you met Brent and you met Richard Mayer last week, meeting the people you're reading about. And Scott, by the way, you want to take the share off so we can get everybody on screen here for the final question from Sarah. So Sarah, you want to jump in with your question? I'm not sure who else had a question written down here. But Sarah Leslie?
Yes. Can you see my video? I think so.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. Hi, Scott. So I just was curious more about, because you had mentioned your bio and briefly about the designing online instruction for people with psychiatric or mental disabilities. That was intriguing to me. Kind of what are the elements of that make it different from just other online instruction? What were your goals with it? And also just the way you said it was not received that well at the time. Is there anything like it now, you think, that's developed?
Well, I can't help but think there must be something happening with the attention that mental illness is getting, due in part to our sports figures who have brought this out, and other conditions related to COVID, and kids who are struggling in school because they are remote learning as opposed to learning in person and so forth. So I can't help but think that there's more out there, but I haven't looked for it at that time. The reason for it is that I noticed, and I knew several people with mental illnesses, that the online instruction was very difficult for them, the way it was typically done, which was what, post something, give feedback, post something, give feedback, read, post, feedback. So it was quite a cycle like that, and they didn't find the structure they needed to be able to try to do more creative kinds of work, writing papers, or the structure needed to write a good paper or even to write a good response. I found something linked close to this in an area called universal design for learning, and that became as important to me as tying reals and universal design to learning, because universal design for learning advocates designing learning in a way that treats the individual differences of each of the students in your class. So it's a lot of work, but it's akin. The metaphor that we use to describe it is that universal design for living, for example, creates sidewalks on the corner of a street where you don't have a curb to jump over. It's a smooth transition into the street. And they did that because it was good for people with wheelchairs, but it turns out it's also good for people who are riding bikes. It's good for people who have baby buggies. It's good for workers who have a wheelbarrow. These universal design for learning ideas are good for people in the same way. It takes into account the different ways that people learn, and helps you design something that has enough diversity in it, enough richness in it to be able to appeal to anyone, whether they're struggling with PTSD or bipolar disorder or depression. Whatever the issue is we need to look at that and see what are the kinds of things that we most have to focus on. And so I got to the point where I was looking at different strategies in different areas, such as recognition and strategy and affect. But then I came up at that point. That's the point at which I retired and didn't continue.
So it was around 2008 when you retired, and that was around the year in which one of the IST students, one of our students graduated. Her name is Dr. Susie Gronseth. She's at the University of Houston, and she has a book on universal design for learning.
Great.
It's an edited book from Rutledge. I helped her get it published. Universal Access Through Inclusive Instructional Design, International Perspectives on UDL. So Susie's going to get Outstanding Alumni Award, Early Career Award from IU.
Great.
And will be on campus October 22nd, Friday, 23rd. Her and her husband are coming here for the award. I'm going to be going with her. Renee, please remind me. We will try and have a meetup with Susie for this class. And Sarah can ask her. Sarah, are you in Bloomington or are you in Florida?
No, I'm in Bloomington.
Okay, so you can actually meet her. Some of the students are online, and some are, so some people are in Bloomington are still taking the online course sections. So we'll have a meetup with Susie. She already volunteered to do something. So we'll get her to talk about this book, and maybe we'll get her to give away one. I'll try.
That's really great.
That's
That's really great.
So yeah, I'll send you the link, Scott, so you can at least see what Susie's up to. You can read a little bit about her. She's had a special ed, she was IST and special ed both. So, it's a good combination to have nowadays. Here's another tip for people. And think about your minor seriously. I minored in educational technology at Wisconsin. That was not my major. No, this is what I'm doing. Your minor often becomes what one does, So, Susie, I think she minored in special ed, or she might have double majored, or had a master's in special ed and then majored in IST. But she's put that to good use. Think seriously about what you take courses in, and what conferences you go to, as Scott mentioned, because that will have huge implications on your path and on your successes and your identity in the field. And identity is important. Scott, you want to make we've gone past an hour. I promised you an hour. You want to have a last word or final comment?
I'll leave the last word to you. No, I don't have a last word.
Well, I want to make sure Millie and anyone else who had a question to come up before you go. Does anyone want to jump in here?
I just had a quick follow-up question about UDL. Do you have any suggestion on how to do UDL, like for instructors who have less experience online? Because UDL emphasizes you have to give students multiple options, which could be at times confusing to instructors. So just wondering your thought.
Yeah. In fact, I wrote an article about that at the time. If Kurt can give you my email, email me and I'll send you the information for it. And if I can find a PDF in my archives, I'll do that too.
Thank you.
Well, Melissa, we haven't heard from you here. Melissa, up in Indianapolis. Is your mic working tonight? Are you on?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm here.
I'll let you say the last word tonight, Melissa.
Well, Scott, it was just really refreshing to see what you're doing now, and really great to see your photos and your travel books, and even how you were able to create that relationship with what you did in your studies to what you're doing now. How it's really comforting to know that all the writing you did in your studies plays out in a different way in your life now. So thank
Yeah.
you so much for sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And Melissa does some international programming, right, Melissa?
Yes, I do.
You want to tell them what it is?
Well, I worked for 20 years in international education,
Mhm.
6 years in international student services, about 4 or 5 years in teaching English as a second language, both overseas and in the US, and then 10 years working at study abroad, but not your typical Americans going abroad, but bringing international students for their 1 or 2 semesters, like an
Mhm.
exchange, but with not exchanging anything.
Yeah,
So I've
Was that
traveled
how you-
all over
That's
the
great.
world too. So
that's
Was it
great.
Butler or IUPUI?
I was at Butler. I was also with a foundation from Chicago, IES Abroad. And I'm currently working in the EdTech field here in Indianapolis at the Christian Theological Seminary.
Okay. Got a really diverse background, a thick background. Someday we'll have to have you give a talk in here about all that you do. I want to thank Scott, and everyone give a round of applause, and we'll end the recording at this point.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
And we'll share your email then with everyone so you can send off the